Well, good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the Dean's Lecture series at Carnegie Mellon University in Qatar. A special welcome to all the visitors who have joined us today. I'm the Dean, Michael Trick, and today it is my honor to introduce a longtime friend of CMUQ, His Excellency Ali bin Ahmed Al Kuwari. For more than 3 decades, His Excellency has been a leader in banking, commerce, and government in Qatar. In 2013, he was appointed the Chief Executive Officer of the Qatar National Bank, and in 2018, he was appointed Minister of Commerce and Economy. Under his leadership, the ministry prioritized the development of a favorable business climate in trade and industry. In 2021, His Excellency was appointed Minister of Finance, and he still serves the state of Qatar in this role today. I mentioned that His Excellency is a longtime friend of CMUQ. He first spoke in the Dean's Lecture Series in 2018 when I had essentially just arrived as Dean, and he was the CEO of QNB at the time. The next year, he came back to share his insights as the Minister of Commerce and Economy. I'm delighted he is back for a third time to share with us the economic outlook of Qatar and the role that the Ministry of Finance plays in Qatar's economy. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Ali bin Ahmed Al Kuwari.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank Dean Michael, for inviting me, to come and speak in the Carnegie Mellon, a place that I'm used to. I've been here before as the Dean mentioned, and again, under different hats. So I'm back again with being a Minister of Finance in Qatar. And actually, to be honest, we were so confused about to select, what's the topic I should be speaking about, because, when speaking about finance, it's a big subject, there is so much going on in the finance, and I'm sure, if you grab anyone in the street and you ask him what's the Ministry of Finance or the Minister of Finance do, and probably they will answer you, they manage the budget, they are responsible for giving money away to entities, ministries in Qatar. So, I think this is the common thing. But to be honest, probably this part is not more than 20% of the ministry role. So this is a very small part of our role. Our bigger role is the responsibility over the fiscal policy of the country, as well as making sure having the monitoring overlooking the economic picture of the Qatar. So this is the main role, the fiscal policies. And when we speak about finance, there is the fiscal policy and there is the monetary policy. The monetary policy is the responsibility of the central bank, like Qatar Central Bank in Qatar, Fed equivalent, in the US. And, in the monetary side, they monitor the interest rate, they monitor, the exchange rate of the currency, they issue the currencies, and also they have the supervision over the financial sector. So that's different. That's the central bank, but we'll talk about the fiscal. The fiscal is more like the budgeting, the surpluses, and, the macroeconomic, picture of the country. So we will go through details as we speak here. Thanks. So, speaking, as I say, the Ministry of Finance is responsible for the fiscal policy of the country, is responsible for the macroeconomic environment, and in order to do that, there are certain functions we do, which is to help us, to achieve this role. First of all, is the preparation and execution of the national budget. This is a very important role, and as I say, this is maybe the common understanding, the stereotype about the Ministry of Finance. So budget, basically responsible for managing the revenues of the country, as well as looking after the expenditure and monitoring the spending after that. Fiscal sustainability. This is a very important role. I must emphasize here, because our role here is not about just receiving money from revenue entities and spending the money in the other entities, but more like fiscal policies that will help us to have fiscal sustainability for the future, So we make sure like whatever we are enjoying today in terms of like good economy, good fiscal position remains through for many years to come. And I think this is a very important role. So we have to put the right policies in place. And when I speak about policies in this one, spending discipline, for example, to have a very good discipline, not to spend as per the revenue, not like in a situation where you have an excellent revenues in a year, you go and you spend so much, and then you have a bad year, and then you go and you do cuts on the economy. So we want to be consistent and making sure what we do is going to be sustainable for the long future from a fiscal point of view. And we have so many tools to do that. For example, we have a fiscal policy framework, which is basically have a longer view in the economy and in the fiscal revenues. And what we do to achieve that is we take different scenarios, very aggressive scenarios. Very bad scenarios and good scenarios of revenues. And based on that, we make sure that we are consistent in the spending, and we have like an agreement, like how we spend the surpluses. So surpluses is very clear. We have an agreement from the fiscal policy framework, how much of it goes to Qatar Central Bank, how much of it to go to reduce debt, how much of the surplus, goes to QIA, Qatar Investment Authority, being the responsible entity for the intergeneration equity, and how much of it to build, as what we call a stability fund within the Ministry of Finance, which is basically to manage budget, volatilities between years. So one year you have a good year, so you need to keep some money for the bad years, so you don't have to go to the debt market every year. So this is the fiscal policy framework which we have achieved, and it was, by the way, very well recognized and appraised by International Monetary Fund, the IMF. They really appraised that having a fiscal policy framework in place. Also, very important for us, we are engaged with the macroeconomic policy. We don't make the direct policies, but we recommend the policies, to the Ministerial Council, and these policies, like for example, taxation policies, tariffs, policies, government services fees, the procurement of the government, how we do the mass procurement for the government and how much, and this is the tools and the policies we use to stimulate the economy. It's very important that we stimulate, the overall economy through these tools, and we do it sometimes. The budget itself is a support for the economy, because how we do the budget, especially with the big projects and the Chapter 4 projects, where we need to show the investment in the continuous investment in the economy. Support for the Qatar National Vision 2030 is very important, and we support it by, having specific funds, for the initiatives of the NDS 3 or the Qatar Vision. External debt management is very important also. This is a core part, a very important part of the Ministry of Finance role. So basically, we issue debt on behalf of the country, and and also we manage the debt settlements to make sure like we're always being rated at the best. So sovereign rating is also our responsibilities. Again, also bilateral and multilateral organizations, participation. We represent the government in all the multilateral financial institutions like IMF, World Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, all the international multilateral organizations that's responsible for finance. Ministry of Finance is representing the country in these entities. In addition to this, also Ministry of Finance have direct responsibility for other entities in the country. So you have, the pension fund, and or we call it the social responsibility, social insurance authority, is part of the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance. General Authority of Customs is part of the reporting line to the Ministry of Finance. Retirement, okay, forget this is a typo mistake, but it's meant to be the taxation authority is also part of the Ministry of Finance responsibility. So in a way, we have the tools that help us to make the policies to manage the economies or direct the economy in a way. Okay, now we'll start speaking about some of the numbers, so we share with you. I mean, actually, Qatar, as part of the expansion of the World Cup, we had to spend so much in the infrastructure, more than 300 billion riyals of funds spent in the infrastructure of the country during that time. And also we had years of, low oil prices. So that the debt in that years, increased to 70%. And that's again, during the COVID year. However, with some discipline and some, actions by the Ministry of Finance, we're able to reduce this to 40% of GDP. And as a result, we got upgraded by the 3 rating agencies, S&P, Fitch, Moody's. All of them, they upgraded us from a AA- to AA. Qatar enjoys the highest rating of a country, a sovereign rating in the region as well as in the emerging market. So, we are one of the best rated country. We're the best rated country, and actually we are better than many developed economies like UK, France. Qatar is rated, so basically if you are to lend Qatar money, you are more likely to get your money back, from a country like Qatar. Again, debt to GDP is a very important, element to assess, the fiscal position of a country and the financial strength of the country. So, usually, countries look to something at the 50%, it's something acceptable or less. So, and usually when countries go beyond the 100% debt to GDP, is usually it's a worrying or it's something that it's not appreciated, and sometimes it means like more work to be done in the debt side. Again, another important function for the Ministry of Finance is the research and the policy making and the publications. So we issue research, data about Qatar and what comparisons to our peer group, benchmarks, and also about the global economy, features and the forecast of all the, the major analysts, especially the IMF. Also, we are a big contributor to the national development strategy because, many of these data and many of these, benchmarks come from the Ministry of Finance. So the Supreme Council, the Supreme Planning Council, they depend on Ministry of Finance to cross-check, the performance of the economy from the Ministry of Finance publication. We also are responsible for managing the relationship with the international analysts, the rating agencies, the IMF. Actually, as we speak, we have an IMF team, visiting Qatar to do the review for Chapter 4, which is Chapter 4 is a very important exercise. This is when the IMF, they publish their report in what they call the country report, and they assess the situation, the financial, the fiscal, the economy, the social, everything, and also the future, their expectations. And they go through a revision. Either they revise you upward or downward. And, many analysts, they monitor their reports carefully. Again, another thing is economic diplomacy. It's our role, as I said, to participate in the international events like the IMF World Bank meetings, and also we're responsible for all the treaties, that present the fiscal, double taxation treaties, also economic and fiscal cooperation between countries. And we have many of these agreements. So these agreements the ownership is with the Ministry of Finance again, and but I just actually talking about Davos. I just came from Davos last week, which was a very interesting event. It was more political than fiscal and economy, and I think many topics you guys probably have followed, through last week. But this is not our subject tonight or today. Okay, speaking about budget is principles, and I think this is maybe a key element of what we are doing as Minister of Finance. And what we do, I think it's very important to understand how we formulate the budgeting exercise. First thing, we have to forecast the revenues, and the revenues, there are 4 elements of revenues here. The main revenue is the oil and gas revenue, and this comes from Qatar Energy. They give us their forecast for energy prices, as well as the revenues associated with it, like the production levels, and so how much money we expect from that side. We have taxation. Also, this is another source of revenue. Tariffs, and income from tariffs imposed by the customs. That's another source of revenue, and government services. The cost of like when you renew your license or something. This is a revenue that comes to the Ministry of Finance. So we forecast this for elements, and the biggest chunk is coming from oil and gas, obviously. So oil and gas, we tend to forecast a very conservative. So we look to the analysts, what they say the oil price is going to be next year, and we take the most conservative and even more conservative. For example, most analysts, their expectations, for the oil prices this year, 2026, around the $65. We anticipate, we put $55 and the reason for this, to build discipline. So we don't go and overspend or so we don't get stuck in a situation when the oil prices goes down. So this is number one. Second thing, we need to look to our existing commitments. Like if you already started the road and there is a cost associated, a cash flow, so you need to make sure this road finishes on time. So you satisfy these commitments. Then the other commitments we have is what we call it the operational side of the budget. And the operational side of the budget is the salaries as well as the operations, what keeps the country going, lights, water, sewage, and this, operations. So we have to ensure that these are covered. In the same time, also we encourage efficiencies, for ministries. So basically, as I said, as part of the discipline process, we have to make sure that we continue to invest in the economy, and this is through what we call Chapter 4 or the big projects. So, so many people would wonder sometimes, okay, Qatar you spent so much money in the infrastructure. Why you continue, investing and creating investing in projects? These projects are associated with the National Vision, 2030 or the NDS 3. So we have to really support the sectors. So we continue to invest, and this is very important because government spend stimulate the economy as well. So this is the budget process. We go through like the budget circular issued in May, then we receive what we call the wish list from all the entities. Everybody says, I want this much money, to spend, and I call it wish list. So, because not everybody gets what they want. This is the role of the Ministry of Finance to filter these requirements. And then we have a draft budget, in September. And usually we communicate the ceilings to the entities when we talk to them. Then, the budget gets submitted to the Ministerial Council, and the Ministerial Council has to submit the budget to Shura Council before 1/11 or 1 November of the countries of the year. So before by 31 October, the submission of the budget has to go from the Ministerial Council to Shura Council, and Shura Council has 1 month to agree the budget. And by December, usually His Highness the Emir issue the law of the budget, which get announced, and usually after that I hold the press conference and explain the budget fundamentals. So just to give you an idea about how we were going with the budget in terms like budget versus actuals, and you can see always because of our conservative approach, we tend to achieve better than, the fiscal position comes out better than the budget. In terms of spending, I think we've been very consistent around the 210 billion riyals, in the last 3 years. So we haven't, gone beyond that in terms of actual spend. And we tend to see this with small, inflation, maybe like, the 2-3% inflation. But the structure of the budget that we continue to invest, I think this is the very important thing. Because one of the things we like to focus on is not to be over-dependent in the government and to reduce the government role in the economy. So the government becomes more like a regulator and enabler, for the main idea of the future of the country for the economy is really to enable the private sector and to create the necessary policies and necessary tools for the private sector to prosper and to lead the economy. It's not good for any country, that government spend or government is leading the development of the economy. Because what happens if you have a bad year, you don't stop spending, then the economy stops, and then it's not to be, and usually if this is the situation, we get what we called, economist knows, this the technology is called the overheated economy, and this is not something you want to have, in a situation, and we want to avoid. So a very important element is to enable the private sector, is to continue. The government role in the economy should be more and more reduced and becomes more policy driven. This is, I was explaining earlier, there are three elements of the budget: the salaries part, the current or the operation budget, and the capex, which is I call it the investment more than the capex. And if we look, to the last, 3 years, we've been very consistent in our spend, and this is the discipline part we talked about. So, the growth is really very marginal in terms of this one, but actually, the one you want to see growing is really the black box, which is the capex, because this is the investment. You want really to control, the blue and brown, boxes, because this is the operational, and this is what sometimes, from a sustainability point of view, you don't want this to be over, taking a big chunk of your budget, because this is, you cannot control it, because this is gonna grow and you cannot then. So even analysts, they don't like to see your salaries more than 30%, 35% of the budget. If you start, salaries becomes 70%, then it will eat up from the investment side. So very important, and I think the shape you see here is maybe very ideal shape in terms of, but you don't want to change that over the time, because salaries tend to, you don't want salaries and current to eat up from capex. And ideally, the salaries, you should push for the workforce to go from the private sectors. So you want to see this less, and then this is with automation, AI, this is one area of efficiency you want to target. I want to share with you a few slides here, and I think this is a good story, I should say, an excellent story about Qatar, where we were and where we are today, and where we're going. So looking, for example, I think one of the key success for the country is LNG. And 1995, we had zero production of LNG. We reached our peak of 78 million tons in 2012. And then, we are again going through an expansion. By 2031, we should reach 142 million tons per annum. This is going to put Qatar again as the biggest producer and exporter of LNG in the world, and yet it will help, to improve the fiscal position as well, because of the revenues associated with this, as well as achieve economic growth. So the IMF expecting an annual growth of 4% for the country from 2025 on an average, but we're gonna peak this year. We're gonna be around 6%. Next year it's gonna be 8%, and then 3.5% is gonna slow down. And so this expansion is gonna drive economy, businesses in the country, and the fiscal position for the country. So this is very important for us. And I must say, this is one of the most brave things Qatar did. I remember, when the LNG was discovered, and then, very, very difficult decisions around it at that time, because you are sitting nowhere. There is no pipelines. Actually, at that time, in the 90s, if you tell someone that I'm gonna, produce or export gas without pipelines, everybody will laugh at you. Say, are you crazy? Are you nuts? Because there is no other way, to transport gas to anywhere in the world. I say, guys, what are you doing? And then the LNG ships, the vessels that came to the picture, and this is when Qatar really invested heavily in these LNG ships, which they take the guys, they liquefy it, then unliquefy it at the terminals, when they export it. And Qatar was a pioneer in this one. And actually, we had to even create a company for that. which is Naqilat, or which is a listed company as we know. We created because nobody wanted to invest in this. Everybody was saying, "You guys are crazy." I mean, how are you gonna export gas without pipelines? Today, this became the most efficient way of exporting gas because, first of all, you're not you don't have the risk of geopolitical tensions. No, your pipeline going through a country doesn't like you, they cut you next day, and then you are stuck with your LNG is in the water. It can be even rerouted if there is a problem. If you have, so this has become the most efficient ways, and we see more and more terminals, being built around the world, and to diversify, energy, sources. So I must say, this is a true success story for the country that went through. Also, Qatar Energy active outside. I mean, they own development on the Golden Pass in Texas. They own 70%. This is with the ExxonMobil, and that's alone reducing 16 million tons per annum, and it's not included in the 142 we talked about. Again, another, interesting thing, so where Qatar was and where we are today. Our GDP, total GDP, and this is real, by the way, it's not dollar. So 30 billion real was the total economy of the country, in 1995. This is, just to give you an idea, it's less than $10 billion, And we had a very aggressive growth, 20% per annum until 2012. The expectation, we're going to exceed the 1 trillion real economy by 2030. Again, this is very phenomenal, when we speak about, growth. I think this is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Assets in the banking sector. This is another, the total assets in the banking sector in Qatar in 1995 was 34 billion riyals. Again, less than $10 billion. Now, as of 2025, it's 2.1 trillion riyals. And, again, huge growth, 21% CAGR from, 1995 to 2012, and that's accelerated to 8%. Actually, Qatar banking sector asset is about 2.5 times the GDP of the country. Again, revenues. Total revenues for Qatar in 1995 was 12 billion riyal. I don't know, probably we make this a day now. So you can see the huge growth and the expectation for the revenue to reach 292 billion riyals. Again, we're using, I think, a $68 a barrel. So if the oil price goes higher, this should be resulted in higher revenues for the country. So again, this is something I wanted to share with you, these slides, just to show where we were and where we are today. I will spend some time, to talk about Qatar National Vision 2030. Now, Qatar National Vision 2030 came out around the 2007. This is with His Highness the Emir Father, and to build a long-term view for Qatar, how we want the country to look like, in 22 years, at that time. And we went through 3 phases to implement the nation. We had the NDS 1, the National Development Strategy 1, NDS 2, and now we are in the last phase, which is the NDS 3. Now, NDS 1 was about creating the national champions for the country who will drive the economical growth. So, you had at that time, the Qatar Airways, the QMB, the Ooredoo, QIA was created around the same time, Qatar Energy, so all the national champions, DR, Qatari DR, Qatar Hospitality, all the national champions came out. So this is basically to set an anchor and to attract investors in the economy. This is phase 1. Phase 2, we'll call it the infrastructure phase, where we built world-class infrastructure. This is one of the best infrastructure, I think, in the world, that what you see here in Qatar. And we had something that helped us to accelerate even the investment, which was the World Cup. World Cup was 2022, so basically it helped us to accelerate the investment for the World Cup. But the idea here, we didn't build this for the World Cup. We built this for Qatar, so for the future of Qatar. So World Cup was only an event that helped us to speed up things, but this infrastructure would have been built anyway, for the country. Now we are embarking on the last phase of the NDS, and speaking about the economic side of it is really about diversification. How we diversify the economy and the GDP contribution of the economy away from oil and gas. And to show you we are going in the right track, because the expectation, sorry, the target we set in ourselves to have the non-oil GDP to grow by 4% every year. In 2024, the non-oil GDP grew by 4.3%, so ahead of the target. Again, also this year, we have announced the 9 months result for the GDP. The 9 months result for the GDP is where non-oil GDP grew by 5%, which is again ahead of our target. And the expectation that we're going to have an average growth, even if you look to tourism, for example. Total people visited Qatar in 2022, which is the World Cup. It should be a big number. 2.3 million people. We ended, 2025 with 5.1 million visitors, which is almost twice the population of the country and more than twice of the people visited Qatar in 2022. Our target for 2030 is 6 million. We're almost there. So we see this is, happening. So I'll just, I think for the sake of the audience and some of you, I'm sure many of you understands and knows the pillars of the Qatar National Vision, but I will go through it again. The first pillar is the human development. I think it's very important. You cannot do much if you don't have the right capital, the right know-how, the right capacity. So it's very important. I think this is an anchor for any strategies, for any development. And that means focusing in education. And I think where we stand today, that's a good example, what we see around us here, and the health. Social development, investing in the culture and the social cohesion. Economic diversification or economic development, and to make sure, I think there are three things, is diversification, competitive economy, and private sector-led economy. I think this is the three key elements we want to achieve there. And then, we have the environmental development, which is to ensure the harmony between growth and environment. These are only just, some numbers, some targets, but, the targets of the NDS it's a huge list. I think 30 pages or so, So what I talked about, the non-oil GDP to grow by 4%, fiscal sustainability, so to have a fiscal balance, which is a surplus of 5.5% of the GDP, future-ready workforce, to shift Qatari workforce from government-led jobs to private sectors, and to have 20% of the private sector jobs, occupied by Qataris. 30% of people with disabilities are economically active, achieve average life expectancy of 82.6 years, reduce greenhouse gas emission by 25%, and 90% of the services to be digitized end-to-end. So this is, key targets we have for us, but just to share with you. Now, also, just to focus on the economic side of the NDS 3, now, energy, to continue the expansion, because we believe that gas is a much cleaner energy than other fossil fuels, and it will be the transit energy to net zero in the future. So for many years, we believe gas will be the prominent energy and one tool to reach, a complete clean, energy sources. So it's very important that our expansion here is going to be very rewarding. Also, the business environment is very important to review, the regulations, the business policies, and make sure we make these are easy to attract, talent, to attract investors, and again to enable the private sector. Again, focusing in diversification clusters, we have identified 4 key clusters that we're going to be, focusing on. Low carbon manufacturing is one of them. Tourism is another one. Logistics and technology slash AI, sector. So these four sectors are going to be the key sectors. But of course, there are enabling sectors. So we look to the financial sector. This is going to be helping these sectors to achieve the diversification. Innovations, to focus on research. QRDI is a good example for that. The Qatar, Research and Development Institute. Also, talent. Again, we go back to human capital, attracting talents. Again, where we stand today is a good example of an important contributor to that element. So again, these are, I'm not going to go through each one of them, but these are the key ones I talked about, the manufacturing, logistics, tourism, IT and digitals, and the enabling sectors, which is financial services, education, food and agriculture. And so for the future, how do things look to the future? So LNG expansion is going to be a key driver of the Qatar economy. It's going to be driving businesses, creating businesses, ancillary businesses, an ecosystem associated with that expansion. Again, and also, I think very important for us, the sustainability part we talked about, the fiscal sustainability, and creating an intergeneration equity, which was achieved through the fiscal policy framework, which the Ministry of Finance developed and managed. I think that brings an end to my presentation, and I will leave, the time for any questions you want to ask for. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that very interesting talk. I was particularly struck about the economy in 2020, or I'm sorry, around 2000, when the vision of Her Highness and the support of all of Qatar created Education City. It was not the economy of today. It was truly visionary to look at the economy then and say what was needed was something like Education City. So thank you very much. We have time for a couple questions. And so we have a couple microphones set up if you'd like to do that. Just a reminder, at these lectures, a question is a short utterance with a question mark at the end. So if you have a question, you are very welcome to come to one of the microphones, or I will be handing this microphone temporarily to the front row if anybody there would have one. You look eager. Would you like to? Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Your Excellency, for the informative presentation. A lot of impressive numbers. And it's a great achievement actually for Qatar, and it's a great to see the move from 1995 till today. So I'm Sahim Al-Tamimi. I'm the director of the Academic Bridge, member of Qatar Foundation. So my question, Your Excellency, actually we always hear about, at least as a member of the Qatari, of Qatar, yani, as a national, we hear about QIA and actually the objective of it to achieve a revenue that will cover we hear that, I'm not sure that accurate or not, which the revenue to cover the cost or the expenses of Qatar. So where we are on that, is this something that we have a target for? Because as you can see, we know that the main revenue, I used to work in the oil and gas sector for 14 years. So we know, of course, that we mainly depend on oil and gas. But what about other resources and sources of revenue to achieve on the long term to cover the cost or the expenses of Qatar for non-oil and gas projects? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, this is a very important question. I think it's a good question in a way. And this is exactly what I was talking about, the fiscal policy framework, which was developed by, the idea of the fiscal policy is really to have a longer view on the revenues, and expenditure of the country, and what to do with these revenues under different scenarios. Because you don't know. I mean, yes, even we're over dependent on oil and gas. There is the fluctuation in prices, so we have to think about it from all aspects. And the idea is also to build the diversification. So I mean, I know people don't love the word taxation here. Okay, when we talk about it, it's imminent. It's going to come. I mean, countries like, for example, look to Norway. Norway is one of the best economies in the world, and they made the best policies. Like, for example, they took a decision many years ago. All oil revenues goes to their sovereign wealth fund. Doesn't go to the budget. This is a decision they made. And so the budget was living on taxations and other income elements, which is, it's a different view. Of course, this is a bit aggressive, but, so what we're doing here is more like a hybrid, yes, we're using the oil and gas revenue to build future sustainability. And the future sustainability is going to come from two sources, from fiscal sustainability as well as QIA. So it's very important to have a very strong QIA that have sufficient revenue to support the country, but we're not saying QIA is going to spend in the fiscal, next year. We're going to say they are going to be ready to spend in the fiscal, but not to be the idea. The fiscal should be a standalone. Should be the revenue should be coming from resources of the country, from taxation, from customs, and to have a very strong economy that can make you achieve that. So this is the idea. But eventually, as I say, these are more like, what they call it, crisis or management or emergencies, like in case oil stops 100%. Then QIA can step in, a central bank can step in, a stability fund with the Ministry of Finance can help, in this case. But the idea is really, this is a future generation fund. We should not touch it. We should not, we should leave it there. For emergency will help, but, should not be meant to be like spending in the economy, in the future. Spending, the economy itself should be revenue generating economy to be able to spend on it, So we need to move from what we call it, a spending economy to revenue generating economy. I think this is very important, and sometimes, we don't understand, so many people don't understand the difference. We want to have this economy a self-generating economy, like anywhere else.
Good. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, if there is another question.
Assalamu alaikum, Excellency. This Bangladesh ambassador. Actually, thanks for your candid presentation. It's not my question, just my curiosity. In your presentation, you have shown that external debt management. It's my curiosity. Why do you need, and with whom you are having this external debt management? Why do you need external debt? Because you have huge economy. In particularly, I can give an example that when other people are presenting to their guests a replica or toy of aircraft, you are presenting real aircraft to your guests. Why do you need external management? Yes, just a curiosity. Excellence is nothing question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think the microphone was a bit loud, so I hope I understand your question. Your question is why we have an external debt management? Okay, okay. Anywhere in the world, they need external debt management, because what happens in any budgets in the world, during deficit time, you need to go and support the budget from debt, So you need to issue either a local debt or a bond or so on, or direct lending from financial institution, or external debt, which is like you go and borrow from outside. And so it's very important that, this is very important element to manage your yearly fiscal position. This is one thing. Sometimes countries issue debt without a need for debt. And let me explain for this. And we have done this, by the way. I think, was it 2 years ago? Qatar, we went away from the market for 4 years. From 2020 until 2024, we issued zero debt, for the country. Actually, we reduced the debt to the other side. But, yeah, in 2024, if you look, it was a surplus year. So everybody says, why you need to issue debt? You have surplus. Because, very important, there is something called, in banking, called the yield curve. You need to always build the yield curve. And if you stop issuing, debt for many years, then your yield curve will go down. And this is not good because you have other entities in the countries that are taking that, like banks, corporates, Qatar Airways, Qatar Energy. Now, everybody follows the sovereign, benchmark. So if you don't build a benchmark, those guys gonna struggle, to get investors and everything. So you have countries, even you'll be surprised that, they are in excellent economic position. Their debt to GDP over 100%. Even they are AAA countries, but they are issuing debt as part of their managing the economy. And this is, for some countries, this debt is not a problem because they can say, if I wake up one morning, I want to decide to settle all this debt, I will write the check. But you worry about the other way, like you start piling debt to support your budget, and then your economy is declining, your inflation is going up, things are not helping. This is the situation you want to worry about.
Good. Thank you very much. Let's thank His Excellency again for an excellent talk. Thank you so much. Very good. So we're going to come over here for a moment. Okay, as part of being Dean's Lecturer, I am very happy to give you something that you've already had a few before, but you may continue to work on your dinner set. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, thank you all for coming today. I hope you enjoyed it. We have another Dean's Lecture next week when we have a representative of Google coming to talk to us. If you'd like to join us for some light refreshments, you are very welcome. Thank you again for coming to the Dean's Lecture.